Connie follows the rule of engagement and orders not to fire a warning shot. However, Aguilar seems uncomfortable with the man's motives, and tells Connie that he's detecting the perimeter. The movie begins with the crew of a medical helicopter landing on the land of Afghanistan to save an injured child. After landing, Captain Varela, a combat medic specialist, immediately approaches the mother holding her injured son. Captain Varela then carries and lays him down inside the medical helicopter. Afterwards, she quickly commands Abda to cut his shirt while the mother, on the other hand, is crying beside her dying son. Varela then puts the guadal inside the injured child's mouth. However, she suddenly struggles with placing it, so Abda explains that the wounded child is full of shrapnel. Due to that, Varela orders Abda to get him breathing as they will check inside his body afterwards. As Varela and Abda quickly, but carefully rescue the injured child inside the medical helicopter, Luis, the pilot, suddenly shouts at Valera. So, Varela favors giving her seconds because Luis forces her to get hurried on treating the injured child. Afterwards, Luis checks Sobrino because he is now going to fly the helicopter. Sobrino is in charge of protecting the medical helicopter and appears to be the crew's gunner. As Luis starts the engine, Varela, on the other hand, begins her operation to cut the injured child's body. Due to that, the remaining soldiers outside immediately aboard and get inside as Luis entirely takes the engine to fly the medical helicopter. Luckily, Luis safely gets the medical helicopter out of the area because gunfire starts shooting them. After getting out, Luis immediately commands Varela to continue her operation as soon as he stabilizes the medical helicopter. However, Abda starts panicking right after Varela gives the injured child oxygen and sees the patient's monitor system showing negative vital signs in his well-being. On the other hand, Varela reports to Abda that the injured child is messed up because he's not breathing. Due to that, the mother eventually cries out loud as she realizes her son is dead. Afterwards, Valera calls Abda to assist her as they will treat another wounded child, who appears to be the second son of the dead child's mother. Later, Varela continues her mission of saving the wounded child in the hospital. However, despite the successful surgery, Varela cannot help but get sad, knowing she failed to rescue the injured child earlier. The following day, Varela sends her letter to the office and meets Private Sanchez afterwards. Private Sanchez will be Varela's new assistant in the medical operation in combat, which will also be his first mission in Afghanistan as a medic combat. Varela brings Sanchez to the medical helicopter to show her equipment. While Sanchez is listening, Varela explains the vital signs monitor and the remaining parts that connect to it. And while the defibrillator is Abda's equipment, Varela gives all small materials and instruments to Sanchez as her equipment. As for the last reminder, Varela instructs her to have everything ready. Meanwhile, the USA and United Nations troops under the Spanish Command Division are driving north of Bala Murghab. While driving, Falcon radios all the units of the military vehicles to stay on the rough tracks when suddenly they hear a loud gunshot from behind. Someone also throws a rock on their side mirror, resulting in Greyhound going outside their convoy vehicle to check who the suspect is. On the other hand, Falcon already has radios for everyone to prepare for a complex attack. Afterwards, Greyhound calls Mono, Hook, and Puma to fall out with him. And as for the rest, Falcon orders all units to station the snipers on the hills. As Greyhound walks outside, he finds the 2 American soldiers get severe injuries right after their convoy got shot. However, an American commander appears at his back, eventually calls him Lieutenant Conti, and commands him to find a landing zone for the medevac in exchange for a platoon, sniper team, and an interpreter. And once Conti and his troops evacuate the wounded, Ledesma assures Conti that they can get out of the area. As Conti leaves, the American commander finds out that Conti is the son of General Conti. Due to that, the American commander commands Sergeant Aguilar to give him a hand. Technically, Conti and the remaining soldiers eventually get stuck in the terrain of Bala Murghab. Meanwhile, Captain Varela receives a radio report that the Legionnaires have 2 injured American soldiers. One with a chest contusion and difficulty breathing, and the other with another less facial severe injury. Due to that, Varela clarifies if it's a bruised thorax and asymmetrical breathing, to which the soldier on the radio quickly says affirmatively. Afterwards, Varela orders the soldier to lie down the injured American soldier and elevate his head. Technically, Varela and her crew are still on the medical helicopter on the way to the north of Bala Murghab. After the call, Varela passes the radio channel to the captain, which is Luis. As Luis answers the radio call, he immediately learns that the terrain is irregular and very dusty. Due to that, Luis must land the medical helicopter in a secure landing zone. After a while, Conti finally sees the arrival of the medical helicopter, allowing him to call his troops to prepare. However, the left wheel suddenly tips on the ground when the medical helicopter lands. Due to that, the supposed rescue helicopter eventually gets destroyed right after the main rotor blade loosens up. Luckily, the medical helicopter crew is safe except for Luis, who suddenly strains his left leg. Meanwhile, Connie suddenly approaches Luis after seeing him blaming the medical helicopter for tipping. Afterwards, Connie introduces himself as lieutenant and eventually finds the broken left wheel on the ground. On the other hand, Varela immediately goes to the location of the wounded soldiers. Afterwards, she discovers that the American soldier has a pneumothorax, so she immediately calls Sanchez to assist her in removing the gear and cutting the soldier's clothes. Varela then starts treating him. Meanwhile, Captain Luis Torres calls the central base of Herat to report their situation. Unfortunately, it turns out that Captain Luis Torres reveals that the American convoy continued its journey and left Connie and his troops behind at the point of the accident. Captain Torres also reports that there are 25 men, including the 2 wounded Americans and the crew of the crashed medevac. Due to that, General Connie from the central base finally decides to fly the Chinook helicopters and pick up the trapped men on the terrain. He then commands Captain Ledesma to inform his son, Lieutenant Connie, that the rescue is on the way. However, Captain Ledesma eventually suggests that if they bring back the helicopter on the same mission, they don't have to return to the terrain twice. Technically, Ledesma clarifies that they can't leave the medical helicopter in the area. Especially if the aircraft is only tipped over, there's a possibility that it can be recovered for service. Convinced, General Connie approves of carrying the medical helicopter. And believes Ledesma that if they bring the aircraft back, they can turn the accident into a victory, and a minor problem from the bad guys taking a photo of it. Then, Colonel Bravo speaks with Varela using radio and tells her they are considering recovering the medevac. However, Bravo reminds her that they need to stay overnight, and ensure that the wounded Americans can survive the night. Due to that, Varela agrees with him and gives back the radio to Luis. Once Varela agrees, Ledesma favors getting the radio from Bravo to talk to Luis. After that, he commands Luis to pluck some equipment from the helicopter and make it weigh 1,500 kilos less. After the talk, Luis begins to plan with Sergeant Aguilar about his task. On the other hand, Varela immediately approaches Luis to treat his strained leg. Meanwhile, Connie is talking with his team regarding their position to guard the terrain. So, Mono will cover the hillside using the vehicle, and the rest will use the slope as a trench to defend the south area. However, Sergeant Aguilar interrupts their conversation and suggests to Connie that he should park the vehicles against the slope for cover. However, Connie disagrees and clarifies that the snipers are already covering it. Due to that, Aguilar immediately radios the 2 snipers, Corporal Carranza and Angulo, that he will send someone to cover them up for the whole night. Later, Connie eventually receives a radio call from Carranza, using his code name as Lynx, saying that there's a man 300 meters southeast of his position. Due to that, Connie immediately calls Aguilar and Rashid to look at the man. As they observe the man, Rashid suddenly guesses that he might only be a shepherd, while Lynx radios Connie that he's unarmed and has no weapons. Due to that, Connie follows the rule of engagement and orders not to fire a warning shot. However, Aguilar seems uncomfortable with the man's motives, and tells Connie that he's detecting the perimeter. So, Connie calls for an unarmed noncombatant to observe their camp at 200 meters from their position over the radio. But then, Aguilar is still unconvinced and informs him to shoot the man as there's a possibility that it's a trap. Pissed off, Aguilar points his sniper toward the man while Rashid suddenly runs to come closer and talk to him. However, the man is about to disappear right after Rashid throws a rock at him. Due to that, Lynx radios Connie that he lost the man. Then, the satellite tracking from Central Base radios Connie that the man is not a shepherd and is probably hostile because he has a motorcycle when he leaves. Due to that, Connie commands Aguilar to alert everyone that the insurgency knows their position. Meanwhile, Ledesma calls Castro and Rodriguez to talk about the Chinook that will carry the medevac. And as they talk, Ledesma tells them they will have to take it with 2 hooks. But first, they will hitch the head of the rotor, and then one cable goes to the back hook and another to the front clip. On the other hand, Luis receives a notice from Connie to lessen the noise in plucking the helicopter parts because there can't be any light on the perimeter when the night falls. Afterwards, he offers Sobrino to be Connie's gunner. Once he gets Sobrino, Connie immediately radios Lynx that he'll send the Super Puma's gunner, Sobrino, to them. Later at night, Ledesma eventually changes plans, and gathers all his troop for their immediate flight instead of tomorrow morning. He then convinces Bravo to let him fly to Bala Murghab to be closer to the point of the incident at dawn. Technically, Ledesma explains that it can make them pass easily as soon as the window opens. Fortunately, Bravo approves, and Ledesma is now departing the central base on the way to the Bala Murghab. On the other hand, Varela and the rest of the soldiers suddenly hear the noise of motorcycles from afar. Due to that, Condi immediately radios Lynx to guard the perimeter cautiously. Then, Condi receives a radio call from the central base, telling him that there are 4 SUVs and 3 motorcycles with 47 men approaching their position. Due to that, Condi immediately calls the attention of everyone in their camp to be alert for a possible attack. Meanwhile, Lynx suddenly notices the herd without a shepherd, so he informs Condi that he'll take a watch on it. Minutes later, Lynx radios Condi once again, reporting to him that there's a motorcycle approaching his position from the west. However, it's not only one motorcycle but 3 of them approaching in parallel along the trail. Due to that, Condi signals Aguilar and the remaining troops to get ready as Lynx tells him that they're raising dust to hide the attack. Afterwards, Aguilar runs with Vasquez when suddenly a Taliban man shoots him. Aguilar calls for an immediate medic. The Legionnaires then begin the gunfight with the Taliban men. While Aguilar protects Vasquez, he also reminds his men not to go near the light because the Taliban men are making Vasquez as bait. However, Rashid immediately takes action to save Vasquez despite Aguilar telling him not to help them. Meanwhile, Lynx successfully snipes some of the Taliban men while covering Rashid and Aguilar from saving Vasquez. Due to that, Lynx immediately radios Condi that the enemy snipers are withdrawing. However, Angulo also gets shot during the shootout. On the other hand, Varela immediately treats Vasquez with the assistance of Abda. So, Rodriguez proposes another plan to fly on the top of the cargo before the dust covers it. She says they can put 2 vehicles in the distance as a reference. On the other hand, Condi receives another radio call from the base that the insurgents are preparing for an attack at dawn. Eventually, Colonel Bermudez takes the radio call and informs Condi that if the position becomes indefensible, he is authorized to blow up the medevac and evacuate in the vehicles. Leaving him no choice, Condi immediately talks to Varela and orders her to move the wounded into the vehicles, including her and the crew. Condi then assures her that his troops will not go anywhere, and it will be safer for Varela and the team to stay inside the vehicles once the gunfire begins. Meanwhile, Bermudez orders Bravo to send 2 Tigers to the POI to make the insurgents fall for the bluff and flee. On the other hand, Luis receives news that his men only removed around 650 kilos before the attack. Then, Luis orders Varela to tell Vilches to find a landing zone for Alpha 2 and Condi that they need 2 of his vehicles as a reference. The following day, the Legionnaires ready themselves for the Taliban attack. However, they realize they are outnumbered because several Taliban men surround them. Due to that, Aguilar suggests they should use their quote from their creed as a symbol of losing the battle. So, Condi leads the creed. Later, the Taliban attack begins. The Legionnaires eventually shoot back while Condi frequently reminds them to save their ammo and only take good shots. Afterwards, he orders everyone to spread out and hold the perimeter. While the shootout happens, 2 Tigers eventually arrive and shoot the Taliban men to scare them. Due to that, the Taliban men flee while Ledesma, on the other hand, also arrives. Fortunately, the Alpha 2 safely lands on the ground because of the 2 Tigers. So, Ledesma gives an order to have the cargo crew get off. Finally, the Legionnaires received more rifles and machine gun ammo from Ledesma's crew to use for gunfights. Then, the pilot radios Ledesma that they are now preparing the medevac. Due to that, Ledesma immediately releases the cables to get it. However, they fail to hook the medevac because of the dust. Leaving him no choice, Ledesma aborts and immediately finds Condi right after landing the Chinook helicopter on the ground. Then, after seeing him, Ledesma informs Condi that they will blow up the medevac instead. Unfortunately, it turns out that Ledesma can't see the references through the dust. The movie ends with the Legionnaire begging Ledesma to take out the medevac instead of blowing it. Due to that, Ledesma makes another plan to save the medical helicopter. So, despite the complex mission, Ledesma and Rodriguez continue their plan to use only one hook. On the other hand, Varela assigns Sanchez to care for the wounded while she helps the Legionnaires. And after multiple attempts, Ledesma finally puts the hook on the medevac. At the same time, Condi and the troops successfully cover Ledesma against the attacking Taliban men. Because of their teamwork, all of the medical crew safely gets inside the Chinook helicopter, especially when Condi saves Varela and Luis from getting killed by the Taliban men. In exchange, Varela orders Ledesma to call the Tigers to help the Legionnaires pass through the Taliban men on the road. Thank you for watching. Subscribe for more videos like this to help the channel out. Have a nice day.